Ladies and gentlemen, in a world that constantly pushes us to speak, to shout, to prove, I want to remind you of a different kind of power, the power of silence. Silence is not absence, it's not passivity, it's not weakness. Silence is intelligence, it's self-respect, it's strategy. When you are silent, you are listening not just to others, but to yourself, to your instincts, to your truth. The loudest person in the room is not always the strongest. Sometimes it's the one who speaks least who carries the most power, because silence is not about hiding, it's about choosing. Choosing what deserves your energy, choosing when to speak, and when to let your presence speak for itself. There is something unstoppable about a person who doesn't react to every situation, who doesn't need to explain every move, who doesn't seek validation with words. That kind of person walks into a room and the room adjusts. That kind of silence commands respect without ever demanding it. When you stop talking, you start building, you start growing, you start observing people, patterns, opportunities. You start understanding who is real and who is just noise. And in that space, in that stillness, you become dangerous because you're no longer distracted. You're focused. You want everything in life be silent. Let your success echo louder than any words you could ever speak. Let your grace under pressure be your announcement. Let your wins be your voice, because when you're silent, the universe has room to work. People underestimate you, and that's your advantage. Remember, storms don't announce themselves. They just arrive and change everything. Be that storm, quiet, unshakable, powerful. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to rise. Silence is often misunderstood. It's seen as weakness, as submission, as something to overcome. But that's a lie we've been told by a noisy world. A world that measures strength by how loud you are, how fast you speak, how many opinions you can throw out in a minute. But true power doesn't come from how much you say. It comes from how well you understand when not to say anything at all. There is a quiet confidence in someone who doesn't need to explain themselves, someone who doesn't chase approval with words, someone who can stand in a room full of people and still choose not to speak, not because they don't have something to say, but because they've already said enough with their presence. That kind of strength comes from within. It comes from knowing who you are without needing the world to agree with you. When you're silent, you aren't giving up your power. You're reclaiming it. You are saying, I don't owe you a reaction. I don't need to convince you of my worth. I don't need to fight to be seen. I see myself. And in that moment, you become untouchable, because no one can use your words against you when you haven't given them any to twist. No one can distract you with drama when you don't feed into it. You protect your energy. You protect your focus. You protect your peace. Silence is also a form of discipline. It's easy to talk. It's easy to argue. It's easy to speak just to fill the silence, but holding back, choosing your words carefully. Choosing your moments, that's hard. That takes maturity. That takes emotional strength. That's the kind of power people underestimate, and that's exactly why it's so dangerous. Because while everyone else is wasting time trying to prove themselves, the silent one is observing, learning, preparing, building. There's something powerful about the person who listens more than they speak. They're paying attention. They're watching what others miss. They're collecting information, storing wisdom, choosing their path with intention. While others are distracted by the noise, the silent one is becoming a storm. People assume silence means you're not in control, but real control means you don't need to announce your every move. You don't need to warn people of what's coming. You let them see it when it arrives. That's what silence gives you: mystery, unpredictability, composure. The most dangerous kind of strength is the one people don't see coming, and silence helps you master that. It also protects your growth. When you're constantly speaking, you're exposing your thoughts before they're ready. You're giving away your ideas. You're opening the door for judgment, doubt, and distraction. But when you keep things to yourself, when you build quietly, when you focus inward, you give yourself space to grow in peace, and growth in silence is the most powerful kind because it's uninterrupted. It's pure, it's solid. Silence allows you to observe what's real and what's fake. When you stop talking, you start noticing who talks too much to cover their insecurities, who brags to hide their fear, who interrupts because they fear being forgotten. You see the games more clearly. You see people for who they are, and that clarity is power, because once you understand who's real, who's loyal, who's worth your time, you move differently. You move wisely. It's also healing. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is sit in silence with your own thoughts. Let yourself feel, let yourself process, let yourself reconnect. Not everything needs to be said. Not everything needs to be shared. Some things are meant to be carried quietly, healed privately, and released gently. That's where real transformation begins, in the quiet corners of your soul that no one else sees. In relationships, in careers, in conflict, silence can be the strongest move you make. Walking away instead of arguing, observing instead of reacting, listening instead of defending. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're in control, you're operating from a higher level, you're refusing to waste energy on things beneath you. That's not silence from defeat. It's silence from power, and the truth is, not everyone deserves access to your words. Your thoughts are valuable, your voice is precious. Give it where it matters, share it when it makes an impact, but don't give it away just to fill space. Protect your voice, use it with purpose. The world may tell you that silence is weakness, but you know better. You know silence is strength, it's restraint, it's wisdom. It's the kind of power that doesn't need to shout because it already knows its worth. The kind of power that gets everything it wants, without ever having to say a word. Patience and observation lead to clarity and power, written in the same bold, motivational tone. There's a quiet force that separates those who chase temporary wins from those who build lasting empires. That force is patience, not the kind of patience that waits passively and hopes for a miracle. No, this is intentional patience, the kind that waits with purpose, the kind that watches everything, learns from everything, and moves only when the time is right. When you learn to be patient, you start seeing the world differently. You stop rushing decisions. You stop reacting to chaos. You stop needing everything to happen right now. Instead, you start reading the room. You start reading people. You start noticing the moves others miss. You stop being a player in someone else's game and start becoming the architect of your own. Observation is a gift, but it's a gift most people never develop because they're too busy trying to speak, trying to be seen, trying to be first. They miss the subtle shifts. They miss the truth behind the words. They miss the energy of the room. But the one who watches, the one who stays still long enough to really see, that person holds the power, because clarity doesn't come when you're running. It comes when you're still, when you observe patterns. When you study behavior, when you watch not just what people say, but how they say it, how they move, how they treat others when no one is looking. That's when you start to understand what's really happening. And once you understand that, you can never be manipulated again. Patience teaches you timing, and timing is everything. There are people who are incredibly talented, incredibly smart, incredibly capable, but they fail because they move too soon. They act out of emotion, they make decisions in panic. They try to force doors that aren't ready to open, and then there are those who wait, who plan, who sharpen their skills in silence, who know when to sit back and when to strike. They're not lucky, they're prepared, and preparation looks a lot like patience. You gain real power when you stop needing everything to happen on your timeline, when you trust the process enough to let it unfold. Not because you're lazy, but because you're aligned. You know that growth takes time, mastery takes time, real transformation takes time. You stop comparing your journey to someone else's. You stop letting other people's speed control your pace. You know that what's meant for you will never miss you, and that gives you peace. Power isn't just in moving, it's in knowing when to move and you can only know that when you've been paying attention. When you've watched how things play out, when you've learned from other people's mistakes, when you've kept your eyes open and your ego out of the way, when you're patient, you don't miss the lesson. And when you don't miss the lesson, you never repeat the mistake. In a fast-paced world, the patient one becomes a threat, because while everyone else is chasing validation, chasing shortcuts, chasing likes, the patient one is building roots. They're building a foundation so deep that no storm can shake them. That's not weakness, that's dominance. When you combine patience with observation, you start to move with precision. Every step has purpose. Every word has weight. Every action carries intention. You don't waste time proving yourself. You don't chase attention. You don't jump at every opportunity that looks shiny. You wait, you study, you choose. And because you wait, you choose better, you choose smarter, you win longer. People who lack patience fall for illusions. They fall for appearances. They fall for flattery. But when you observe long enough, illusions fade. The mask slips, the truth shows up, and that truth gives you clarity, and clarity is a weapon. It cuts through confusion, it ends toxic cycles. It silences doubt. When you have clarity, no one can shake your decisions because you've already seen what's real. And the beautiful thing about all this, it's accessible to anyone. You don't need money to be patient. You don't need privilege to observe. All you need is self-control, discipline, self-respect, the willingness to sit with uncertainty without letting it shake you, the strength to watch without reacting, the courage to wait without fear, because the one who is patient will always outlast the one who is impulsive, and the one who observes will always outsmart the one who rushes in blind. That is where your power lies, in the pause, in the stillness, in the space between what's happening now and what's coming next. The world belongs to those who don't just move fast, but who move right. And right moves come from a clear mind, a trained eye, and the kind of patience that makes people wonder what you're planning next. Not because you told them, but because you watched, you waited, you learned. And now you're ready. Let your actions make the noise, written in the same commanding, motivational tone as before. There's something undeniable about a person who doesn't need to announce themselves, who walks in silence, works in silence, and lets their results speak volumes. In a world addicted to attention, it takes a different level of power to let your actions be your voice. Anyone can talk. Anyone can make promises, anyone can declare how great they are, but not everyone can deliver, not everyone can back it up. That's where the difference lies. The real ones don't tell you what they're going to do, they just do it. And by the time the world realizes it, it's already done. There's a unique kind of respect you earn when you let your work speak for itself. Not because you demanded it, not because you shouted for it, but because you became it. You became undeniable. You became consistent. You became the person who shows up, delivers, grows, and keeps moving. No validation needed. When you shift from telling people who you are to showing them, everything changes. You're no longer in the business of convincing. You're no longer explaining. You're no longer performing for approval. You've got nothing to prove, only standards to uphold. You become someone whose energy speaks before your words ever do. Talking about success is easy. Living it is different. That takes discipline, that takes sacrifice, that takes focus. And those things don't happen in the spotlight. They happen in the quiet hours, in the early mornings. In the moments when no one is watching and you still choose to give your best. That's where greatness is built, not in what you post, not in what you say, but in what you do when no one claps. Letting your actions make the noise means you trust yourself. You don't need an audience to validate your process. You don't need permission to rise. You understand that applause is nice, but growth is better. You understand that people will doubt you, question you, ignore you, until they can't anymore. And when that day comes, they'll realize it wasn't your words that got you there. It was your work, your effort, your unshakable belief in your own vision. There's something magnetic about a person who's all about action. Who doesn't need to flex, doesn't need to compete, doesn't need to post every move. They're too busy building, too busy evolving, too busy turning dreams into results. And that kind of energy, it can't be faked. It's real, it's felt, and it's unstoppable. When your actions speak, you don't need to interrupt. You don't need to argue. You don't need to prove your point. People notice. People feel it. Your consistency becomes your credibility. Your results become your reputation, and that reputation, built through action, is something no one can take from you. It also protects your power, because when you talk less and do more, no one can predict your next move. You're not broadcasting your plans, you're executing them quietly, sharply, without distraction. That mystery, that unpredictability, it's powerful. It keeps people guessing. It keeps you focused, and when setbacks come, and they will come, you don't crumble. You don't quit. You don't go online to vent about the struggle. You get back to work, you rebuild, you recalibrate, and you rise again. Because your focus is not on how things look, it's on how things are. That's what separates those who talk from those who do. There will always be people louder than you, people who shout their success, people who exaggerate their achievements. Let them, because when you walk in silence, you're not in a race with anyone. You're in alignment with yourself, and that's a race you win every time. Eventually, people will have no choice but to respect you, not because you demanded it, but because your actions proved it. They'll look back and realize you were consistent when others gave up. You were disciplined when others got distracted. You were focused when others chased fame. That's the long game. That's the real flex. The truth is, no one remembers what you said you were going to do. They remember what you actually did, the promises you kept, the goals you crushed, the impact you made. Let that be your voice. Let that be your legacy. You don't need to be loud to be legendary. You don't need to explain your greatness. Just be great, show up, put in the work, own your space, and let the results make all the noise you'll ever need. Because when your actions are aligned with your vision, when your discipline meets your purpose, the world hears you, even in silence. Control over words is control over destiny. As always, written with a strong, motivational tone, bold, precise, and empowering. Words are powerful. They can build empires or burn bridges. They can start revolutions or end relationships. But the most powerful thing about words, the fact that you have control over them, and when you learn to master that control, you don't just change your language, you change your entire life. Every word you speak is a decision, a choice, a direction. Words shape your relationships, your mindset, your energy. They define how you see yourself and how others see you. That's why the person who controls their tongue controls their world. Because they're not a slave to emotion, they're not reacting, they're responding with thought, with purpose, with power. You don't have to say everything you feel. You don't have to speak just to be heard. Real strength is in restraint, in knowing when to stay silent, in knowing when to speak and how to speak. There is wisdom in pause, in space, in holding back words that serve no purpose except to satisfy temporary emotions. Control over your words is control over your emotions, and when you control your emotions, you stop giving your power away. We've all seen it, people who talk too much, who say too little, who talk themselves out of opportunities, out of relationships, out of their peace. Not because they're evil, not because they're weak, but because they don't understand that their words are steering the ship. Every sentence, every reaction, every careless comment, it's either building their future or tearing it down. When you speak without thinking, you give away your power. You expose your strategy. You leave yourself open to misunderstanding, to misinterpretation, to manipulation. But when you speak with intention, people listen differently. Because they know you mean what you say, and you say only what matters. That's the kind of voice that echoes long after you've stopped speaking. Your words are seeds, Plant negativity and you'll grow chaos. Plant hope and you'll grow resilience. Plant clarity and you'll build trust. Every time you speak, you're building your reality. So ask yourself, are your words aligned with the life you want to live? Are you speaking fear or faith? Are you spreading confusion or confidence? Because your mouth is the tool. You decide how it's used. People often chase external power titles, status, money, but the ones who actually win long-term are the ones who master internal power first. And that begins with language, how you speak to others, yes, but even more so, how you speak to yourself. The things you say when no one's listening, the labels you give yourself, the story you repeat in your own head. That internal dialogue, that's your real script. That's the voice that drives your choices, your habits, your self-worth. You cannot speak failure over your life and expect to succeed. You cannot tear yourself down with your own words and expect to feel confident. You cannot speak like a victim and live like a victor. It doesn't work like that. You have to change your language to change your life, and that takes discipline. It takes awareness. It takes responsibility. People think confidence is loud. It's not. Confidence is controlled. It's calm. It's intentional. It knows when to speak and when to hold back. And most importantly, it knows the weight of its words. Confident people don't waste breath proving themselves. They don't argue to be right. They speak with clarity and then let their presence do the rest, because they know the most powerful voice in the room is the one that doesn't need to raise itself. And when things get tough because they will control over your words becomes your anchor, you can either spiral or stabilize. You can either fan the flames or calm the storm. It all depends on what you say, how you say it, and what energy you release into the space around you. Words can escalate or de-escalate. They can deepen wounds or begin healing. They can stir drama or create peace. Your power lies in choosing wisely. This doesn't mean silence forever. It doesn't mean holding back your truth. It means owning your truth with precision, with respect, with strength. It means not using your words to hurt when you're hurting, not using your voice to destroy what you later wish you could rebuild. It means having the emotional intelligence to speak like the person you're becoming, not the one you used to be. Every great leader, every strong soul, every powerful presence you've ever admired, they've all mastered their words. Because once you master your words, you master your message, and once you master your message, the world listens. Control over your words is not about being perfect. It's about being intentional. It's about knowing that your destiny is shaped not just by what you do, but by what you say. So speak like the future depends on it, because it does. Silence isn't absence, it's alignment, written in the same poised, bold, and motivational tone. Silence is misunderstood. People often confuse it with absence. They think if you're quiet, you've given up. If you're not posting, you're not progressing. If you're not speaking, you're not thinking. But that's not true. Silence doesn't mean you've disappeared. It means you're aligning. Aligning with who you are, with where you're going, with what you truly want. There's a difference between being lost and being still. The world is obsessed with motion, hustle, noise, speed, but growth doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like stepping back, pausing, letting things settle. It looks like turning inward so you can move forward. That's alignment, that's intention, that's power. When you go silent, you get clear. You start hearing your own voice above the noise. Not the voice shaped by opinions, not the voice manipulated by fear, but the real one. The voice that knows what you were made for. The voice that isn't rushed by pressure, that isn't swayed by trends. The one that whispers truth when everything else is screaming doubt. Silence helps you align with your priorities, with your standards, with your boundaries. You start to feel what drains you and what fuels you. Who distracts you and who sees you. What you've been chasing that no longer serves you. All of that becomes visible when you're not distracted by constant noise. Sometimes the most powerful answers come not from asking others, but from finally listening to yourself. There's nothing passive about being silent. It takes courage. It takes maturity. Because silence means you've stopped trying to explain yourself to people who don't want to understand you. It means you've stopped pouring energy into convincing and started preserving it for building, for healing, for creating. Silence is not a sign you've quit. It's a sign you've chosen to shift. You can't align your life if you're constantly reacting to people, to opinions, to chaos. But when you go quiet, you stop reacting and start reflecting. And reflection is where real transformation begins. That's where growth becomes intentional, where you start asking the real questions. Am I living for myself or for approval? Am I on autopilot or am I actually awake in my own life? Am I rushing towards something or running from something? You can't fake the answers in silence. That's why it's powerful. Silence sharpens your intuition. It deepens your awareness. You stop overlooking red flags. You stop falling for distractions dressed as opportunities. You stop entertaining what isn't in alignment with your higher self. You begin to feel the difference between what feels good now and what's good for you long term. That's how alignment is born, not in the noise but in the stillness. When you're aligned, you no longer beg for clarity. It finds you. You don't force outcomes. You attract them. You don't chase attention. You carry presence. There's a shift in your energy. You become someone who doesn't need to talk to be heard. Someone who doesn't need to prove to be powerful. Someone who doesn't need to run to be moving. And yes, silence confuses people. Especially those who are used to chaos, to oversharing, to drama, to being constantly updated on your every move. But let them be confused, because you don't owe access to people who haven't earned it. You don't owe explanations for the work you're doing in private. You don't owe pieces of your journey to anyone who won't celebrate your arrival. There's peace in alignment, a deep, grounded kind of peace. The kind that can't be shaken by opinions, by noise, by timelines. You stop needing to announce what you're doing. You stop craving applause. You stop being bothered by who's watching, because you know who you are. And you know where you're going, and that knowing, that's unshakable. In silence, you start letting go of what isn't yours to carry, the guilt, the pressure, the stories people wrote for you. You stop living from habit and start living from truth. You become more selective about your energy, more intentional with your time. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-committing. You stop shrinking to fit into rooms you were never meant to be in. You align. You evolve, and eventually you emerge, stronger, clearer, louder, but only when needed, because silence teaches you that your voice is a tool, not a toy. And when it's time to speak, you'll speak from a place of power, not pain. From clarity, not confusion. From truth, not fear. Silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. It's full of strategy. It's full of strength. And when you embrace it, you don't just find peace, you find alignment. And once you're aligned, you don't chase things anymore. You attract them. You don't force your future. You flow into it. Not because you said too much, but because you finally said less and started listening more.